President Biden's federal vaccine mandates are expected to lead to 12 million more people getting the coronavirus vaccine. This, according to a study by Goldman Sachs. We have new Hill-HarrisX data on the matter. Let's take a look.
Well, I think the president is being somewhat moderate in his demand, if you want to call it that, in that there are some people who really don't want to get vaccinated, but they don't want to lose their job. You got to give them an off lane. And the off lane is if you get tested frequently enough and find out you're positive, you won't come to work and you won't infect other people. So it really is somewhat of a compromise there. Myself, I would make it just vaccinate or not. But he was trying to be moderate in what his pronouncement was.
The poll found roughly 1/4, or 24%, of voters believe the mandates will lead to less than 1 million more people getting the jab. 19% of respondents estimate the federal push will get between 1 and 5 million more shots in arms, while 9% said between 11 and 15 million. 13% said the measure will lead to no new shots. 41% of Republican voters said the mandates will lead to less than 1 million more vaccinated, while Democrats were more split on the issue. Ryan, what's your take?
Well, it's interesting because this is a separate question than whether you support a mandate or oppose a mandate. It's a question of whether you think it's going to actually work to push people to get the jab. Interesting that a huge number of Republicans don't think it's going to work. So that helps to explain a lot of that opposition to it, because if you're going to strip people of civil liberties and you also don't think it's going to work, then you're like, well, of course I'm against that. But the broader question of whether it's going to work, if you believe Goldman Sachs, which I think they're probably going to do a fairly credible analysis of this, is that it is going to nudge millions of people into getting the vaccine, because the hesitancy among people is not uniform. We tend to think that because of our social media ecosystems, that everybody has either the same ideas or these black and white ideas around the vaccine. But a lot of people are in the middle somewhere. They're like, I'm not quite sure about this, but okay, if I have to, then in order to do X, Y, or Z, then I'm going to do it. And I think that's why the Biden administration went for it, because they realized that they can get 10+ million people, and if you add on top of that the tens of thousands of infections coming every week, you're getting more and more people immunized.
So, and I tend to agree with the Goldman data, but I think the discrepancy between their data and then what our poll found is based on the fact that my guess is Goldman is looking at not just the result of the Biden mandate, which I think is going to be challenged in Republican states all over the country. So will actually have no effect or little effect in those places. But they're also banking on major corporations and businesses implementing their own vaccine mandates. I'm kind of bullish on the fact that we're going to get more people vaccinated by private businesses saying, if you want to work for us, you have to, rather than doing these federal mandates that are going to get tied up in litigation in states for a long time. But I think that number that they're looking at, about 13 million, seems much more likely than the 0 that some in the poll think are going to be a result of this.
And while we do all this, there's that Lambda variant that is heavily vaccine resistant that is spreading, and then there's a new one that's now of concern that they found in a nursing home in Kentucky that has a lot of immunoresistant capacities. And so, there is still, as long as the vaccine is working against Delta, Alpha, and a lot of the other variants, obviously that's a good thing. We have to keep our eye out for new variants that are going to be able to escape what these vaccines can do. But to your point, there's data out of Maine, and according to these new employment numbers, just 65 out of 33,000 healthcare workers, or 0.19%, quit their jobs over a statewide vaccine mandate announced for healthcare workers last month. Meanwhile, GOP lawmakers like Governors DeSantis, Abbott, and Kemp moving to block vaccine mandates in their area. And we're seeing this in a lot of other states as well, that particularly if it's a statewide mandate, people are like, okay, I'm just going to get the vaccines. What is it, 33 people out of tens of, or 65, I forget the exact number, out of, tens of thousands of people, well less than 1% are actually quitting their jobs, which suggests that the hesitancy, people aren't as committed to their resistance as some people think.
And what I'll be watching for is the percentages within the U.S. military that choose not to, because the military is already going forward with the vaccine mandate throughout the force. And that's, largely a young and healthy population. So I could see some objecting on those grounds. But then on the other hand, we all know DOD requires, over a dozen vaccinations for some of their forces. So I think that the military being a huge sector of the population could actually kind of spell for us, if we have significant detractions there, we could sort of have a sense of what we might have nationwide. But I tend to not think we're going to have that many within the military either.
Right. And again, it doesn't mean that the mandate is a good thing. It just means that when it comes to the question of, is it going to push people to get the vaccine? Well, yeah. And in some ways, that should be more obvious to people, I think, than it otherwise is. And
fundamentally, the one thing, in closing, that I think has been lacking from the broader discussion around mandates is I think that the Biden administration has failed in public education about the vaccine. And listen, I worked for Donald Trump. We did not do the greatest job at times when it came to COVID messaging, so I know this is not easy to do. But I would say this, if almost 50% of the population doesn't understand why they have a duty to those around them to get vaccinated, and that we're going to be able to have variants spread and more people get sick and the Lambda and the whatever next because so many people are unvaccinated, they're going to continue to delay doing that. So I think that there's, whether it's doctors, whether it's public health officials, truly having those hard conversations, giving briefings to the public, highlighting what people's risk profiles are, not just to themselves and others. Perhaps the public education is going to do more to drive people to get vaccinated than mandates.
We'll see, but thank you for watching What America's Thinking, and we will see you next time.